Okay, now I'm going to switch tack a little bit. We've talked a lot about these formats. There's some new formats coming in. As you can see, there are a lot of different different ways that revenue comes in on YouTube content. So I want to talk a little bit about how should you really be thinking about your YouTube revenue? And we're going to use, we're all here in the entertainment world. Let's use an analogy of a movie studio. And how does a movie studio think about whether a movie is successful? Do they look at ticket prices? So ticket prices is the equivalent of what we call CPMs, which is what we charge an advertiser to show up against your content. I've never seen a movie where they've said, this is a really successful movie, we are charging $11 per seat. It's just not how they look at things. And it's not how we should be looking at things either. The CPM is important, and the ticket price is important, but it's not the entire picture. So maybe they look at how much of their theaters they've filled. This is analogous to our coverage. So we sell ads in a certain rate. How often are we able to actually have an ad to serve against you? Now, in a movie theater, it's actually fairly simple. It's how many seats have you filled? So did you fill up 70% of seats, or 80% of seats, or only 20% of seats? As you multiply your ticket price by how many seats you filled, that starts to get you a better sense of how the movie's doing. But it's still not the entire picture. So on the YouTube side, that's what we call RPM, so revenue per 1,000 page views, which takes into account how much we charge and what our coverage is. That's still not the entire picture, because I've never woken up on a Monday morning and turned on the TV to find out that the weekend's big box office hit filled up 75% of seats. You look at audience. That throws in a new twist into this picture. How many people actually saw the movie? You may have filled up 80% of your seats, but if you only showed it in 3 theaters, your movie may not be very successful. So this is where it's important to consider the distribution that you're getting. So the YouTube analogy is think about how many views are you getting, as well as where are you getting those views. So YouTube is a very powerful global platform, and we're often getting global distribution for partners in YouTube stars. So you're not just getting views in the US, you're actually getting views around the world. And if you think about that from a movie perspective, a movie studio isn't just distributing their movies in one city or one country, they're distributing them globally, and they're looking at how all this fits together. So the most important thing to think about when you're looking at revenue is actually revenue. And look at the overall amount of revenue that you're making off of an asset that you produce. Right? So the same way a movie studio will spend a lot of money to create a movie, and we'll look at how much money that movie has made. You should look at, when I create an asset, when I create a video, how much overall revenue can I make on that video? Taking into account things like CPMs, the price that we're charging advertisers, but also coverage and RPM, so how often are we showing an ad, and also where and how broadly are we able to distribute that content. So in a lot of cases, we're able to distribute content to markets that don't have as developed an ad industry, or markets where you would otherwise never be able to get distribution. And think of all of these incremental things against the different formats that we're offering. Now, I realize this is a more complicated or nuanced view of your revenue than we've traditionally talked about, but as YouTube grows and as we roll out these new formats, these lessons are going to be important to really understand the performance of how we're working for you. I want to give you some examples now show you what happens if you look at things properly and what happens how dangerous it can be to look at your revenue against the wrong metrics. So I call this a tale of two partners. First one is the bad. So here's an example of a partner that focused exclusively on RPMs, on the revenue per 1,000 page views that they were making. They were tracking how they were doing over time. It was increasing. It went from 1 to 5 over the course of 6 or 7 months. In some places, this gets you, in a lot of the media world, this gets you a promotion. You're doing really great. But the way that they got this was by being very, very, very aggressive with their monetization. So they were putting and selling a lot of pre-roll ads, and it was content that maybe wasn't ready for it. It hadn't built up a big enough audience. And they lost track of their monetizable views. They lost track of building up their audience. And what happens is their overall revenue went down. If you focus just on RPM, it looks like you're doing really well. But if you lose sight of building up that audience and building up that loyal subscriber base and loyal user base, then in the long run, or actually in this case not even that long, it only took a few months, your overall revenue can go down. Meanwhile, we have the good, a partner who was not as singularly focused on RPMs. That wasn't the only metric that they were looking at. They were really focused on increasing their views and building up their audience. And despite having relatively flat RPMs over time, this partner actually saw revenue go up. So they weren't as focused on the ticket price. They were more focused on the overall revenue. So I'm going to leave you now with a few best practices before Margaret comes back up on stage and we take some of your questions. So a few things to take away from this talk. As you're looking at YouTube and looking at your performance, always make sure you look at a revenue breakdown and think about where your revenue is coming from. Now, I'm giving you this as best practice as a guide of what you should be doing. I'll be the first to admit that we haven't always done the best job of giving you that breakdown. And we're working on that to roll out better reporting for you. But make sure that you're always comparing apples to apples if you're comparing how you do on YouTube versus somewhere else. And look at things like the format. So how much money is coming in when I enable certain formats, and what impact does that have on my audience? How much money is coming in from different geographies? If I'm comparing two different distribution strategies, am I comparing US revenue to US revenue? Versus US revenue to US RPMs to global RPMs. Really make sure you're paying attention to this. The second piece of advice is to optimize for your long-term revenue. So remember the tale of the good partner and the bad partner? Make sure that you're focused on building up your audience and not just on CPMs or RPMs or these intermediate metrics. And really optimize your revenue on the video that you're creating. So for every piece of video that you create, make sure you're looking at how can you make as much money over the life of that video, which can often be a long time. And finally, make sure you're testing and iterating. Keep experimenting with things. We talked about some of the trade-offs between short-term revenue and views with formats like InStream. In some cases, the content is ready for InStream. In other cases, it's not. So try things out. Try different formats. Try TrueView. Try different strategies with formats. We've had some partners who will only turn InStream on after a certain number of views to make sure that their loyal subscribers don't get pre-rolls, and then once it's kind of taken off, they get pre-rolls over the life of the video. Others have tried the inverse, where their loyal subscribers are probably more likely to watch pre-rolls, so they start off with pre-rolls and then turn them off as more people discover. So try things out. Try them out on certain videos. Try out different formats and see what works best for your content.